Well, the Young Turk, what's up? Cenk, Uygur, Anna Kasparian. That what's up came out a little weird, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
It was also weird that you're about to call me J.R. Jackson.
What do you mean?
It sounded like you were about to say
really?
Cenk, Uygur, Anna Kasparian.
Wow, that's super weird.
Yeah.
Okay, lots of weird beginnings in today's show.
We do look alike, to be fair.
Yeah. I'm Uygur, son of Uygur. That's a Last Kingdom reference. All right, so look, guys, we got an amazing show for you today. Trump goes to war with our own government, as usual, but it's his own administration, the intelligence officials. We'll get to that in a second. Did Trump commit treason? I don't know. People are talking, including Trump and Putin secretly. Oh, for Christ's sake. Okay, an amazing story about that. That's coming up in a little bit. So great show. Oh, and do not miss the war between Elizabeth Warren and Howard Schultz.
Oh, totally my favesy story.
Yes,
of the day.
And I don't know if Howie knows that they call her Warren G. Okay, so anyways, but I do also want to tell you about what's coming up within the week. Okay, so first off, tomorrow, second hours just for members. Last time in January, well, it's the last day in January, so that makes sense. But don't worry, you can get it for free if you try out membership for a week. That's free for a week, tyt.com/trial, okay? So that's for tomorrow. But also for tomorrow, this is really important. We're gonna have a guest on Rebel Headquarters at 8:05 p.m. Eastern that is going to make some news about the 2020 campaign. Yeah, interesting. I'm not saying anything except for the words I've just said. So definitely check that out. And then next Tuesday, State of the Union, free and available for everyone. A little extra analysis for the members as always. So tyt.com/join and become a member, or like we said, tyt.com/trial to try it free for a week. Okay, so lots of amazing things coming up in the next week. Oh, by the way, sorry, one last thing, guys. The game whose name cannot be mentioned, that happens on Sunday, and that's fairly large. We're gonna watch it along with you guys. If you want us as a second screen and see our reactions to the plays, etc., we've been doing that for a long time on the Young Turks, maybe probably around 15 years or so when Dave Kohler first brought his laptop to Ben Mankiewicz' house while we were watching the game. So that's also free and available to everyone in the beginning, tyt.com/live. It starts at 3 o'clock Pacific, so 6 o'clock Eastern on Sunday. Watch that game along with all the folks from here, me, Ben, JR, so many others will be here to watch. Anna, I think, is coming as well.
I will be there, yes.
Okay, so that'll be fun.
Christian.
So it's like a family atmosphere. I think you guys will love that.
Yeah.
All right, what's next, Anna?
All right. Donald Trump is sparring with the US intelligence community, yes, his own intelligence community. And this is following the recent assessment that was put out to essentially report what the major threats are to US national security. Now, we talked about it on yesterday's show, but just to quickly summarize the findings of the report. Number one, a border wall was not really mentioned. That was not considered one of the primary threats to be concerned about. However, Iran is not developing nuclear weapons. They are still following along with the 2015 nuclear deal, even though Donald Trump has pulled out of it and has implemented sanctions against Iran. Russia and China are actually more aligned and do pose cybersecurity threats. They are specifically targeting our electric grid and also the 2020 election. North Korea is unlikely to give up nuclear stockpiles, and ISIS continues to stoke violence in Syria. Now, to be fair, ISIS has lost a lot of ground in Syria and in Iraq, but the intelligence report essentially says that ISIS has not been wiped out as a threat. They still pose some level of threat in Syria.
So Anna, at first I thought you were saying that Trump was at war with his own intelligence, which also makes sense because he has at times said,
I'm like a smart person.
When in reality he knows he's not. So there's a little bit of a conflict there as well. But and it's a good catch that they didn't mention the wall. I didn't notice that because of course the wall has nothing to do with national security or almost nothing to do with it. So it didn't even occur to me, but it didn't occur to the national security folks either because it's not, compared to the other issues, is a tiny issue and one that has not gotten any worse over the last couple of decades. In fact, now less people coming in through the border with Mexico. All right, so on the substance of how you should interpret these findings. So look, there's a couple of different camps, and I don't think we're in either one of them. So one of the camps is these intelligence officials are demigods, they know everything, and you should bow your head to them and accept all their findings. And then there's the other camp, which is the Trump camp, which is, they don't know what they're talking about. Kim Jong-un told me we're gonna have a strong deal and they're not going to do the nuclear anymore. Okay, so neither one of those is correct. But where do you go on that scale of credibility for the intelligence officials? And so a lot of progressives and just thinking rational people go, wait a minute, I remember these guys getting it pretty wrong in Iraq, to say the least. So I'm not ready to jump all in and say what they say is a
threat and what isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, is 100% credible or not, right? So, well, you could tell in the details, right? And first the context and the details of this particular report. The context is, remember that in the Iraq war, it wasn't that the intelligence officials had no idea what they were doing, and they all thought that there was weapons of mass destruction, and they all thought that Saddam had attacked us along with Al Qaeda. No, that intelligence was greatly cherry-picked by the administration. So there's the intelligence reports, and then there's what the administration does with it, right? So in reality, intelligence officials very clearly said that Saddam Hussein did not attack us on 9/11. But Dick Cheney and George Bush came out and implied that anyway, and then the media did a terrible job of going along with that talking point. On the weapons of mass destruction, they were mixed, and Dick Cheney took the parts that he liked and said, yaha, right? And buried the parts he didn't like. So it's not quite fair to put that all on intelligence. But do they lean a little bit more towards being cautious throughout the world about national security, and hence a little bit more warlike? Hey, we got to be careful. Let's keep fighting ISIS, etc. Yes, so they have a thumb on the scale, probably unwittingly, being more hawkish.
Look, the only thing that I saw from this report that raised a few questions for me, a few red flags, was the analysis on what's happening in Syria and Iraq in regard to ISIS. Because there is this consensus among Washington elite and the intelligence community that pulling out of Syria is a bad idea. That's something that Trump has decided to do. And it's one of the few things that Republicans in Congress actually stood up to Trump on. This country loves war. But I think what gives this report credibility is the honesty in what's going on with Iran.
100% right.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I actually find this report more credible than almost any of the reports I've seen in the last 20 years. Because in this particular case, the rest of the establishment, even I would say the media, etc., and certainly the neoconservatives, which usually dominate in this arena, are against Iran. So they agitate towards more conflict with Iran. So they will cherry pick any slight evidence to say, well, I mean, there was a gun in Iran, so they have a weapons program, they have a weapons program. I'm exaggerating, but not by much, okay? So in this case, though, the report was like, no, they're complying. They're complying with the agreement, even though we pulled out of it. So that is, in this context, extraordinarily honest.
Yes.
And so that buys them credibility on the other issues.
Absolutely. Now, of course, most of what this report indicates about our real threats conflicts with what Trump believes. So I'm gonna give you this awesome video that shows you what Trump says, and then what the National Intelligence Director Dan Coats says as he is participating in a hearing about the findings of this report. Take a look.
We have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
ISIS is intent on resurging and still commands thousands of fighters in Iraq and Syria.
Chairman Kim, we have a great chemistry, and we're well on our way. We signed an agreement that said we will begin the immediate denuclearization.
North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities.
I have President Putin He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
Not only have the Russians continued to do it in 2018, but we've seen indication that they're continuing to adapt their model.
So CNN did a good job juxtaposing, Trump's, statements with what the intelligence report finds.
Now, guys, even if you're MAGA, you know the reality. Who do you think is more likely to be telling the truth? Donald Trump, who contradicts himself and lies about 18 times a day, or the serious professionals who look into this and actually have an incentive to, if any incentive at all, it would be to be more hawkish, right? And yet on issues like Iran, they're not. And so, and by the way, on some of the issues they would tend to, hey, look, there's no need for conflict there. And on other issues, they say, no, we need more conflict. That balance shows you that they're actually looking at the intelligence as opposed to having preconceived notions. So you know that. And by the way, if you don't know, the FBI director and the director of national intelligence are both Republicans. And Dan Coats, who's the director of national intelligence, is a very right-wing Republican. So it's not like he has any incentive to disagree with Donald Trump and to contradict what he's saying. And he was picked by Donald Trump. If anything, he has an incentive to agree with Donald Trump, but he just can't because that's not true. In fact, when pressed on some other issues, including Russia, he said we should discuss that behind closed doors, which I found to be very interesting.
Absolutely. So a few other things I want to mention. I thought it was interesting how the report also went into some of Trump's economic policies and how that poses a threat because of the alliances that we're now seeing internationally. So according to the report, American trade policies and unilateralism, meaning unilateralism by Trump, have strained traditional alliances and prompted foreign partners to seek new relationships. And so, we talked about this a little bit previously in regard to the trade war. All of a sudden, you're seeing Mexico doing business with China. They're forming an alliance there, which means even when the trade war is over, American businesses will be hurt because, well, someone else has taken their place. And so it would be much harder to create that business relationship again. Also, activity in North Korea that is inconsistent with full denuclearization, and most of what North Korea has dismantled is reversible. So the point here is, okay, look, it's good that we've taken a more diplomatic approach to North Korea, but it has not denuclearized. And whatever little progress we've seen with their denuclearization is easily reversible. So that was the point there. Now, in response to this entire report, of course, Trump had a meltdown on Twitter. So I wanted to share some of that response with you. Let's go to graphic 5. He says, this is my favorite tweet. The intelligence people seem to be extremely passive and naive when it comes to the dangers of Iran. They are wrong. When I became president, Iran was making trouble all over the Middle East and beyond. Since ending the terrible Iran nuclear deal, they are much different. But what? No, they are not much different. They're literally still following the terms of that deal, even though you've imposed those sanctions. And how? What do you mean? So they're not causing any other problems internationally anymore?
No, it's of course, as I alluded to earlier, contradictory because everything he says is weirdly contradictory. Why? His motivations are to say, I'm tough on Iran, so Iran's now knows their role and is being compliant with me because I'm so strong. On the other hand, I'd like to start more conflict with them, so they're causing trouble and I won't stand for it. So which one is it? Are they being compliant or causing trouble? Well, you can't have both, but he wants both, so he just says it.
No, okay, so that was the first part of the tweet. Here's the second part. Remember, he said they are acting much different. Okay. So then he says, but a source of potential danger and conflict, they are testing rockets last week and more, and are coming very close to the edge. The economy is now crashing, which is the only thing holding them back. Be careful of Iran. Perhaps intelligence should go back to school.
Perhaps you should go back to school. I'd love to see your transcripts. This moron couldn't have gotten past a D on any class at all. He can't read past the page. Okay, his daddy got him into Wharton. He's a total failure, talking about going back to school. You know that he wanted Obama's transcripts from Columbia and Harvard? Because he couldn't believe, why? That a black man got into those schools and got good grades. Obama was the president of the Harvard Law Review. That means he was among the very best students at Harvard Law while he was there. So it's not like, he got in through affirmative action or any of that kind of stuff. He proved himself within the law school, right? But Trump got his daddy to get him from Fordham to Wharton and has never released any of his transcripts because they would be mortifying, because he's an absolute and utter fool. So that school thing just drives me crazy. Now, like I said, there's no consistency at all. I'm so tough and around, that's why they're complying. But they're not complying, so we might have to attack. You see how intelligence doesn't know anything? I figured it all out. They should go back to school. He's just a total fool. Look, things are devolving for him. And so, and this story is part of it. Now you see, just in the last 24 hours, Chris Christie coming out and taking a lot more pot shots at him, okay? Now, Chris Christie was the idiot who was standing behind him after dropping out of the race, going, oh, okay, Donald, what do I do? Right. What do I do? And for 2 whole years, he's still been quietly playing for a position. He's not playing for a position anymore. Why? The ship is sinking, and the rats sense it. Steve Bannon, speaking of rats, just came out and started criticizing Donald Trump. Oh, interesting. And now Dan Coates, the intelligence officials, et cetera, are like, no, the president, that's not true. This is the reality. Oh, Russia, we got to talk about that behind closed doors. No, tick, 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 tick. He's in way more trouble than he realizes.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Russia, because the Financial Times published a piece today that I think is important to discuss. Earlier, the Washington Post broke news that Donald Trump had a number of private meetings with Vladimir Putin without anyone else on the American side in the room. No aides, no interpreter, no one who could basically make a record of the conversation that was taking place, or the conversations that were taking place. Now we find through a report by Financial Times that Donald Trump also had a meeting with Putin in Buenos Aires at the tail end of the G20 summit. Now, this was last year in November. According to Financial Times, the White House has acknowledged the 2 leaders met in Buenos Aires after Trump canceled former bilateral talks following Russia's November attack on 3 Ukrainian naval vessels. So Trump was, in essence, forced to cancel that meeting because of the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. But he still met with Putin, and he did it behind closed doors without a US aide with him, without anyone taking record or taking note of the conversation taking place. According to a Russian government official's account, the 2 leaders spoke for about 15 minutes about a number of foreign policy issues, including the Azov Sea incident, which is what I was referring to earlier, and the conflict in Syria. They also discussed when they would have a formal meeting. So the timing here is important because this 15-minute private meeting happened in November, and then Donald Trump announced that he was going to pull troops, American troops, out of Syria around December 19th. This is all in 2018. I just think that timeline matters. We'll see.
Yeah, so there's timing matters on a couple other issues too, but that's a great point by Anna. So we were all wondering, why is he pulling out of Syria in a panic? All of a sudden, immediately before, he was like, oh, maybe, and the generals were trying to talk him out of it. And then all of a sudden he comes out and says, no, we gotta get out of Syria right now. Almost as if he got orders, and that's not us saying it now, we said it at the time. Look, we want him to come out of Syria, but we said the way that he did it was very curious. And now this timing gives you some clue as to, and back then we were having a discussion about he had a conversation with Turkey, Russia wants us to withdraw, what were the possible motivations? Now this leans more towards Russia than Turkey or any of the other motivations, but it's just one data point. Okay, now the other curious timing things. So he had said, well, I'm canceling the November meeting with Putin because of what happened with the naval ships that Anna told you about. And then after that, he has this secret meeting with Putin in Buenos Aires when they're at the G20 together. Okay, well, you don't need the formal meeting if you're gonna have an informal meeting. So it turns out you canceling the formal meeting was just a show, was to pretend you were being tough on Russia, but in reality you snuck around and was like, okay, Vladimir, what do you want, what do you want? Okay, so don't pretend you're a tough guy and you cancel talks when you went and had a secret talk with him anyway. Point number 2 on that same issue is, when you have formal talks, well then that is when the US at least has a translator, and you're supposed to have aides in the room with you, staff in the room with you to take notes, to make sure there's no misunderstandings, and that we follow through on what we said. Now, Trump in the past has not done that on occasions because he didn't want anyone on the American side knowing what he's talking to Putin about. In this case, since it's not a formal meeting, he's like, oh, well, the translator didn't happen to be here. I had to just use the Russian translator that Vladimir brought and Melania, and that's a curious different thing, okay? Right. And so it's very convenient not to have a formal meeting, but an informal one where only the Russians are present and Trump, because then he has no witnesses. You know who tries to avoid witnesses? Criminals.
So we're not the only ones that are concerned about what took place during that closed-door private meeting. In fact, National Intelligence Director Dan Coats was asked about this recently, and here was his reaction.
Donald Trump met privately with Vladimir Putin, and no one in the US government has the full story about what was discussed. Director Haspel and Director Coats, would this put you in a disadvantaged position in terms of understanding Russia's efforts to advance its agenda against the United States?
This is a sensitive issue, and it's an issue we ought to talk about this afternoon. I look forward to discussing that in a closed session.
In other words, I don't want to say publicly how much Trump has damaged us by not allowing any other Americans to hear what he's saying to a foreign adversary, and to not even have a translator from our side. So I don't know what Dan Coats said in the closed door hearing, but he thought it was an important and sensitive issue that the public shouldn't know about yet. So that is very telling. And it's also very telling when you don't, look, if I'm going to deal with anybody else, I want my own translator in a business meeting, let alone if I'm the American president. And why wouldn't I want my own translator? Why would I trust a Russian translator? What a weird thing to do unless you're absolutely insistent that there be no witnesses. And so, and remember, in previous cases, he has also told the translator not to come into the room with Putin. And in one instance, he came out of a meeting and took the translator's notes.
Right, and said, do not talk about the meeting with
anyone.
And
do not ever talk about this meeting.
Right.
Oh, it's so obvious, come on, you know who tries to avoid witnesses. You know that, if you're breaking the law, you don't want any witnesses. All right, by the way, I don't know what Melania's role is, and now there's a lot of speculation online, I'm not gonna get into that. But I do know that he has put her in legal jeopardy by having her attend that meeting. So, I mean, she doesn't have to speak Russian because the translator is presumably translating obviously back into English so Trump can understand. So Melania can hear everything that's being said. Now she's in legal jeopardy for, that is such a foolish thing to do.
I know, but I don't think you're assuming, but he doesn't care about the people around him and what kind of legal jeopardy he puts them in. I mean, think about the number of people associated with Donald Trump who have already faced the legal ramifications of being associated with someone like him.
Yeah, last two things here. One is also about timing, but in a different context. The timing of how long the meeting took. Trump said the meeting was very brief and it was just like, no cordial greetings at the summit as he would do with any other leader. The Argentinian press said, no, that is not true. The meeting, they sat down and the meeting took some time, definitely over 10 minutes. Now people from our administration, the US administration, are saying, no, the meeting took at least 15 minutes. Trump was not telling the truth about how brief it was. Gee, I wonder why you would lie about how substantive the meeting was that you didn't want anyone else to witness. Look, I don't care if you're on the right wing or the left wing. If you can't see that this guy's trying to hide some relationship with Russia, you're being purposely obtuse. And so if you want to deny reality for whatever political reason that you have, that's your choice. But every other rational person in the world can see that Trump has some deal with the Russians that he doesn't want anyone else to hear about.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to give you an update on what's happening in Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro has responded to Donald Trump, and it appears that he is willing to negotiate with opposition. We'll give you that and more when we return.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. I love our audience. John Brugliera on Twitter caught something that we missed. Did you happen to notice he says that in Trump's intelligence tweet, he uses there as in THERE instead of there as in they apostrophe RE. Who needs to go back to school?
I know, but I actually did catch that, but I didn't harp on it because it's Trump. Like, it's so commonplace in his tweets that I feel like it's cliche to bring it up.
If Obama had made one mistake.
I know. I mean,
okay.
He's normalizing bad grammar.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that other people don't have intelligence and they should go back to school, that is when it is incumbent upon you not to misspell things.
Yeah.
Okay, and so don't get me started on global warming. That boy's hell on Turlet says, I challenged Trump to find Iran on a map. Oh, how great would that be if a reporter did that? They'd be like, oh, that's a gotcha question. He's the president, man, for Christ's sake, right? It's nearly inconceivable that he would find it. Nacho Mamo says, Cenk, please don't tease us with the announcement for tomorrow. Now I want to call us sick from work tomorrow. Hashtag Bernie 2020. No, look, I'm not saying anything. All right, don't get too excited. It's a great announcement, but you don't need to call out sick from work. Okay, so tomorrow night, 8:05 p.m. Eastern, we do have an exciting campaign development that we will share with you guys with a guest that we've got on. All right.
The conflict with Venezuela continues. In fact, the State Department has issued a travel warning to Americans, urging them to avoid any and all travel to Venezuela. In fact, the advisory says the following: do not travel to Venezuela due to crime, civil unrest, poor health infrastructure, and arbitrary arrest and detention of US citizens. Venezuelan authorities may not notify the US Embassy of the detention of a US citizen, and consular access to detainees may be denied or severely delayed. I'm glad that they issued this because I do believe that it's correct. Nicolas Maduro is going to want to retaliate against Donald Trump. The Trump administration has just implemented sanctions against Venezuela, specifically their oil company, their state-owned oil company. And so would he want to retaliate against Americans? Sure, I don't think it's far-fetched to think so. But the situation is devolving rather quickly, and there is some fear that there could be military intervention, especially since both Bolton and Trump have said that military intervention is on the table.
And Bolton was caught with a note on his notepad that said 5,000 troops to Colombia. That sounds ominous. You know, Bolton's a sneaky dude with a very sneaky mustache. And I wonder if he wrote that and then had it facing out on purpose so the press could see it as a threat. But that's not important, it's speculation either way. But obviously them saying, yeah, no, we're considering military options is important because that's crazy. What are we gonna do, invade Venezuela? But it's Trump and Bolton, you never know, buckle up. Now the good news is the Russians are on Venezuela's side. So why is that good news? Because Trump might get a call suit and go, I meant Venezuela's actually kind of awesome. Right. And did I say I don't like Maduro? I mean, hey, dude won an election. Okay, which by the way is not necessarily the case.
No, yeah, it was a rigged election, that's clear. But Donald Trump and various countries, it's not just the United States, refused to recognize Nicolas Maduro as the leader of Venezuela. And they are now noting that the opposition or the opposer, Juan Guaido, is the real president of Venezuela. Look, they're pushing for regime change, and every time I see that, I get incredibly uneasy. Yes, I acknowledge that Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy, but anytime there's a push for regime change from outside forces, especially outside forces who oftentimes are influenced by business interests, you're gonna have a disastrous situation. So it makes me uneasy, and at the same time, I recognize what the Venezuelan people are going through. And by the way, yeah, Nicolas Maduro might have not gotten elected democratically or fairly, but neither did Juan Guaido.
Yeah, so look, if you came up with a solution, the world did, all the international community did, and right now the international community is split. So on the side of Venezuela and Russia is also China, Mexico, Uruguay, Bolivia, etc. So that's on the Maduro side saying, no, Guaido is not the elected leader of Venezuela. But if the world were to be united and they decided, hey, look, let's have new elections, let's monitor them, either Jimmy Carter's organization or the United Nations, or maybe Mexico or Uruguay, right? I would love that. I think that would be the perfect answer to this, because I don't believe that Maduro was democratically elected. But we know for a fact Guaido isn't. We know for a fact that he's influenced by foreign actors, including the United States, who he coordinated his announcement with. Donald Trump tweeted minutes after Guaido's said that he was the real leader of Venezuela. Now the US has said, oh, Guaido will get to control the assets of Venezuela that is in US banks. I think that's outrageous. So I'm not interested in another coup. So you've got a series of bad choices here. The only good choice is the one I just outlined, with doing another election that's actually fair and monitored. Now, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get Maduro to agree to that. So I understand that and acknowledge that. But of all the other options, which are all bad, I think the worst one is a de facto coup, where we have a total mess and risk civil war within Venezuela. The military continues to back Maduro, but what if the military was split? And then what, we're gonna have another situation like Syria, Iraq, etc. on our hands? And gee, it's another country in the world that happens to have a lot of oil.
Exactly.
That all of a sudden we're meddling in their elections. Now wait, I thought we were against meddling in elections. Now we're principled here on the Young Turks. We're against the Russians meddling in our elections, but we're also against us meddling in Venezuelan elections.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, the US has been attempting to do a coup on Venezuela since 2002. There was a failed coup back in 2002, and it was US backed, and that was when Hugo Chavez was the president. So again, there have been business interests involved. Whenever there are these outside influencers trying to come in and do something like regime change, you gotta ask yourself why. If they give you the answer of human rights, you gotta ask yourself, okay, well, what other alliances do you have? And if you're doing business with Saudi Arabia, and if you're killing civilians in Yemen to basically carry out Saudi Arabia's war, well, then you really have no leg to stand on when it comes to human rights. You don't really care about human rights.
Yeah, and I'll say two more things about it. One is, in Honduras, we supported a coup that put in a right-wing government that's human rights abuses are far worse. The left-wing government did not have human rights abuses. It was actually standing up for the people of Honduras. The right-wing government has been terrible on human rights abuses, and we're absolutely love it. So spare me your crocodile tears on human rights abuses. We actually care about the human rights abuses in Venezuela, and Maduro has done them. And so that is why we are deeply conflicted about what to do in a very difficult situation. But when Trump tells me he cares about human rights abuses, please. It's such an obvious and brazen lie, which brings me to point number two. Oh, you care about elections that aren't real. You know that your big buddy over there, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, also says that he's the rightful leader of the people of North Korea.
We have good chemistry, Cenk. We have good chemistry.
Yeah, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, where's the elections? They're massive human rights abuses, the worst in the world. Sham elections or no elections, and you don't give a damn. One, they're your allies. I mean, why is it? Two, you think you're gonna make a great deal with them and it's gonna help your ego. And three, North Korea doesn't have oil, and Saudi Arabia lets us get their oil for free, not free obviously, but cheap, right? But Venezuela wants to actually control their own oil. All of a sudden, oh my God, elections. And you're, buddies with Kim Jong-un, Mohammed bin Bonsa.
Right.
So please, what a load of horse crap.
Yeah, a US-based journalist was murdered and dismembered by Saudi Arabian royals, and he did nothing about it. He tried to cover for it. So the whole human rights abuses thing is ridiculous. I want to move on to another part of the story though. Following US tensions with Venezuela, the Venezuelan president came out with a statement about Donald Trump. So here's what Nicolas Maduro had to say. Donald Trump gave the order to kill me, told the Colombian government, the Colombian mafia to kill me. If something happens to me once, Donald Trump and Colombian President Duque will be responsible for everything what happens to me. Okay. He also says, though, and this is important, and I don't know how serious he is about it, but it does show that he is maybe caving a little bit to pressure. I'm willing to sit down for talks with the opposition so we could talk for the sake of Venezuela's peace and its future. Now, the United States has just implemented sanctions on its oil company, and there is a lot of worry that there could be US military intervention in Venezuela as well. Those could be the factors influencing Maduro to possibly negotiate with his opponents. But either way, this talk is different from what we heard from Maduro previously.
Yeah, I do believe that. And this is also difficult and has two sides to it. So on the one hand, is Maduro willing to negotiate with the other side, which is a good thing, by the way. So I think the other side saying that they're the leaders of Venezuela is absurd, and it is a de facto coup. But Maduro has his own set of problems, and there are two legitimate sides in terms of the actual citizens of Venezuela, and they should negotiate. So is Maduro being pressured to negotiate, which is good? Yes. So is the sanctions a big part of that? Yes. The oil money there is about $11 billion, so that's no joke. And already the Venezuelan economy is in terrible shape, and sanctions from the US were their #1 trade partner in terms of their crude oil. So that would be further devastating to them. On the other hand, so when we target a country, we usually start doing sanctions and start to crush their economy. Then turn around and go, look at their bad economy, I can't believe it. Oh, look at these people, they don't know, they're trying to keep their oil for themselves instead of letting ExxonMobil have it. And look, they can't manage their economy at all. Obviously you have to privatize everything in the country and give it to American companies. So given that history, I am less likely to support sanctions. So again, Venezuela, no easy choices here. I'm glad Maduro is coming to the table a little bit more, but I do not support the coup. I do not overall support the sanctions, because the one thing we are absolutely positive about is that it will further crush the people of Venezuela, no matter which side they're on.
Exactly. But I want to give the other side of the sanctions as well, because it is important. So one of the ways that Maduro is able to maintain power in Venezuela is he's paying off the military. Pays off the military, they remain on his side, and he's able to carry out this, dictatorial regime. And so, look, my issue with the sanctions is the intentions behind it, right? What is the intention behind it? Is it because this government actually genuinely cares about the people of Venezuela and they want to squeeze him out in order to, protect these people? No, that is not the intention. The intention is to open up that oil for American use, for business interests. That's the problem. And whenever that happens, and whenever we go into something, whenever we try to do regime change with the wrong intentions, usually ends up even worse for the people of that country.
Yeah, we meddle far too much. Last piece of nuance and context here on sanctions. I'm not saying I'm a blanket against all sanctions. It greatly depends. So for example, sanctions did not work in Iraq because there was a dictator in charge during Saddam Hussein's time. And he didn't care what happened to his people. And so he had plenty of money and it didn't bother him at all. And so all it did was further crush the people of Iraq that were already suffering. On the other hand, sanctions in South Africa worked brilliantly, and economic pressure overall does work. So you just have to know the right context. Why did it work in South Africa? Why did it work in the uprising in Egypt when there was massive labor strikes, economic pressure of a different sort? It's because when you have a set of people instead of just one dictator in charge, and it affects all of their economic interests, they then put pressure on that leader to make a difference. In this case, the military guys do have influence there, very important influence. And as Anna pointed out, they make a lot of money from Maduro, but if that money is now getting hurt, they then put pressure on Maduro. So sanctions do have some chance of working here. On the other hand, it's at the expense of the Venezuelan people, and the intent in this case is not to do something like get a dictator like Mubarak out of office or end apartheid. It is a bad intent, which is to really help American companies in Donald Trump's interest and to help a coup rather than give the desperately needed aid and comfort to the people of Venezuela.
Exactly. All right, we're gonna take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna come back to the United States, talk about what Democrats are doing to restore voting rights and how Republicans are fighting them.